Delegation decided to go alphabetically, so at this time our next speaker will be Delegate Robin Grammer Jr. Delegate Grammer sits on the House Appropriations Committee and will give us his overview of the 2015 Maryland General Assembly session. Delegate Grammer.
Thanks everybody, and thanks for coming out. I know we're limited on time, so I'll keep my discussion to two topics. One is to kind of give you an idea about how things generally worked, at least for me down there. And the other, seeing that as I'm on the Appropriations Committee and I've had some people ask specifically, and I've seen a lot of false information go out, I'd like to talk a little bit about the budget. So let me talk about the bill which I put most of my effort into this year. It's the Java Act. Who's heard about the Patriot Java Stop at Patapsco High School? Has everybody heard of that? Okay, you probably saw the news. For those of you who haven't, let me tell you this story. So the teachers at Patapsco High School, they teach a class of children with cognitive disabilities. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to put together a vocational program for these students who obviously have special needs. They tried to get them out in the community, out into different businesses, but the challenge that they found with that was that for a business to take on kind of apprenticeship, they had insurance liabilities, and the scope of what the students could do was fairly limited. So that program wasn't especially valuable. So what the teachers did, Miss Dana Evans and other teachers at Patapsco, is they came up with this idea, and they called it the Patriot Java Stop. It's basically a coffee stand. And I don't mean like pots of coffee. They ran a Keurig machine. Hit a button, make a cup of coffee, sell it. Now, that doesn't really sound spectacular. But when you're a student with cognitive disabilities, your options are limited, but you need some way to facilitate that kind of learning. And what the teachers found was this program was really fantastic. The students learned how to run a cash register, they learned stocking, they learned customer service skills. It was great. The parents were coming back to the school and they were saying, you know, my son or daughter would never even speak in public. Now they're approaching people at restaurants. This is fantastic. It's a great story. And who wouldn't love the kids? So you've probably seen it in the news, in the paper, the Patriot Java Stop. It's fantastic. Well, so did the Maryland Department of Education. And they came to Patapsco High School and they said, you know what? We have a state regulation that says you can't sell caffeinated beverages in high schools. The teacher said, look, we're not even just trying to sell caffeinated beverages. What we're trying to do is sell it in a limited scope as a part of a developmental program. And the Maryland Department of Education said there are no exceptions. So we put in a bill, it's called the Java Act. And the idea was to override the Department of Education and allow these kids to reopen their program. We had a fantastic panel. We had Ms. Dana Evans from Patapsco. We had one of the students. We had one of the parents. We had the teachers union. It was probably we pulled it off. It couldn't have been any better. Unfortunately, the Department of Education testified against us. And we had so many co-sponsors on this bill. We had almost the entire county delegation. We had Democrats, we had Republicans. We had a Democrat teacher in Baltimore County who was an ardent fan of the bill. It landed in Ways and Means, where we had Delegate Bob Long and Delegate Rick Metzger. It was the perfect initiative. But as it turns out, the chairwoman of the Education Subcommittee tends to defer to the Department of Education. So one person killed our bill. One person killed our bill. And that's kind of the power of leadership down there. And I approached this session as a learning experience. I wasn't trying to change the world in my first session. But I wanted to kind of figure out how things worked, and this really gave us a great opportunity to do that. And that hopefully gives you an idea, you know, how things kind of work. The legislature is a social body, and there are social rules that apply. So we'll bring that issue back next year, and we'll try it one more time. So the second issue I want to talk about, and being on the Appropriations Committee, I saw all of this firsthand, was the budget. So if you've watched the news at all, the budget has been the big story. We came into the session, initially we had about, I think it was a $1.2 billion deficit coming in. We have a new governor, and the big question is, what's the governor going to do with the budget? So in Maryland, we have, the governor has spectacular powers as far as the budget goes. It has actually unique rules in the country. They found, several decades ago that the legislature was getting itself in trouble. It was spending more money than it had revenues coming in. So what they decided to do is pretty much unilaterally give the governor powers as to what was in the budget. The legislature cannot add to the budget, but they can modify the budget. And they can take away from what's in the budget. So the budget came from the governor, and it landed on the desks of about 26 people, myself being included. Now, in the legislature, the committee is extremely powerful, and it's extremely collaborative. And in committee, appropriations got a lot of great things done. You could add language where you want to direct agencies to focus on specific things. You can get reports. You can take rules and say, hey, maybe we can make this more efficient. And we consumed about 2 months on that process until the Appropriations Committee came out with the final budget. So for the most part, it was non-controversial. I'll give you an example of one of the things we changed. The governor had changed the formulas, the DDA funding for adults with disabilities, and we amended that. I supported that, was happy to do it. It was all pretty much non-controversial until the very end. About 10 minutes before the final budget decisions, they whipped out a packet of information which made fairly large changes to the budget. Now, if you've heard anything about the pension changes, this was where this came into play. Essentially what they did is they amended the pension process from the corridor funding to the actuarial. Don't get wrapped up in that. If you read that in the news, that wasn't the overwhelmingly large change. The huge change as far as the budgets go, is that they removed a large chunk of the supplemental payments into the budget that they had promised. Let's back up a couple years. At one point in time, we were 100% funded as far as the budget the pension goes for state employees. And over time, they decided to dip into the pension fund. They have a habit of doing that. There's a fund there, it's money, let's dip into it, we'll spend it, we'll put it back. We're at about 66, 67% funded. So at one point they said, okay, we're in a little bit of trouble. What we're going to do is we're going to make state employees pay an additional 2% into the pensions. And what the state will do on our end is we'll increase our supplemental contributions to the pensions to $300 million per year. Well, the employees paid their end. They're still paying their 2 additional %. What's not happening is the state is taking that chunk of what they're paying supplementally and they're just cutting it. Initially, it was $300 million. Before the session, it was $150 million. Now it's $75 million. In committee, when they put this proposal forward, they used a benchmark of 85% funding. And I said, if we don't implement this, where are we currently at to get to 85%? And they said, we'll do that in the year 2025. And I said, if we implement this change, when would we hit 85%? And they said 2028. So essentially what they're doing is they're taking about 3 years worth of pension funding and scrambling that over the budget. Now, I'll answer Jake's question before he even answers it. I voted against the budget. I voted against it when it came out of committee. I voted against it at the end. I think the way you have to think about this is most people aren't sitting home reading the budget of Maryland. And if I came up to Jake or someone from this district and I said, here's what we're going to do. This budget is going to create another $600 million deficit. We're going to push the pension funding back, and we're going to reach 100% in 2038. The pension is going to pay more in paying off state debt than it is in building new schools. And I think the message that we sent this year in the election was that we need to get a hold of our finances. We need to stop spending more than we're taking in. And that's the only thing that the governor's budget actually asked for, is that we don't spend more than we take in. The budget passed. It passed the House, went to the Senate, they made it a little worse. Went to conference committee, they made it a little worse. I'm hopeful that we'll get to that point where we're spending, what we're taking in. I'm hoping we're going to do that next year. One thing I want to point out is you've also heard a lot about this. Education funding. There is a lot of bad information coming out of Annapolis, coming out of the media. Let me give you a brief analogy. When Martin O'Malley was governor, he would make a claim that we have made record cuts to the budget. What he was actually doing is he was increasing the budget and making a decrease to the increase and calling that a cut. That's not a cut. And they did the same thing when the governor added to the budget this year. Baltimore County actually got almost $18 million in additional funding than it was getting. And I just want everybody to be really clear, there were no cuts to education funding. If there is, the conversation we did not have is, how do you make education better? Should we change anything in regard to student testing? How about Common Core? Do we need to change that? We did not have any of those conversations. What you are doing with 100% guarantee, you are paying for education. You are paying out the ear. And when you look at your paycheck coming home every week, every 2 weeks, I want you to remember that. You are absolutely paying for education. And if anybody has any doubt, Jake or anybody else, I have it right here. And I'd be happy to sit down and go line by line and explain where the budget gone and where it went and where the money's going and what changed. So I know that's a little convoluted explanation as to how the budget process worked this year. But I hope I gave you guys kind of an idea of how things worked out. So thanks for coming and thanks for listening to us.